Hey everyone, my name is Brandon Jacob. I am a career counselor in the Career Services and Leadership Development Office. I'll be leading today's webinar on resume and cover letter tips. This is our first webinar that we've done in our office, and so we're excited to bring this to you, especially for those of you who can't always make it to our in-person meetings. This is a really important topic to me because a lot of times these are the documents that allow you in front of an employer first. This is the first chance that they get to see a little bit of who you are and what you might bring to the table. We're going to be talking about best practices and what is most common, what is helpful to elevate maybe a resume that's feeling a little bit stale into something that's a bit more excellent. So we're going to start with the resume, and then we'll cover the cover letter towards the end. So first of all, it's really helpful to make a list of everything that you've done. When I say everything, I mean work experiences, volunteering, things that you've done in school, so activities, clubs you've been a part of. They could be specific classes, projects that you've done within those classes, study abroad experiences, service learning, everything. And you can keep a list of this in like a Google Doc. Some people have sort of a comprehensive resume where it's like a 5-page long resume. But all we're doing here is making note of everything so that when you're making a resume that's targeted for a particular position, you've got this list that you can remember everything by. Because there's nothing worse than getting to the point where you're trying to update your resume and you forget certain things that you've been involved with, or you forget some of the detail to describe it well. So that's step one. Make your list of everything. Then I would want you to look at examples. When you look at an example, you're kind of keying into both the format, how is it presented? So, what does it look like visually? What sort of sections are they using to present their information? What order do they put their information? All of that is kind of the formatting, the structure of it. But then you're also looking at the content. How do people describe their work experiences or their particular skills related to the field? So ideally, if your major is communications and marketing, and you know that you want to sort of get into the PR world or social media marketing, then Google, social media marketing resume. And you're going to see different examples come up. Look at them. The more that you look at, the better, because you're going to see some themes that arise. And those themes will help you decide, okay, I've had some internships or some project experience, and this is the way that I want to highlight those experiences. Finally, and I think most importantly, review job descriptions for the field that you're looking into. So again, to use the marketing example, actually go onto Handshake or Indeed or LinkedIn and look at potential internships or jobs. You don't even have to apply to these, but just look at them, because each of these job descriptions are going to lay out a list of qualifications that they're looking for, the different experiences, qualifications, and skills that are going to make it a successful candidate. That's basically telling you what they're looking for and what should end up in your resume. So to illustrate that, this is kind of just a quick, I know it's small, so you don't even necessarily need to look at the exact words, but these are 3 different resumes that you can see are formatted in a different way. And, as you look at different examples, you can say, all right, this is what I like about these, this is what I don't like about these, and come up with your own model of what you think looks good and how you want to format. Likewise, when you look at a job description, so I just pulled this one up on Handshake, and most jobs, I would say almost every job is going to have those like minimum qualifications, preferred qualifications, and you can look through like what are they mentioning. So in this one in particular, we're looking at a health research intern, and they're looking for things like somebody who's currently enrolled in an undergraduate program. So your education section is going to kind of demonstrate that. They're looking for people with familiarity with publication databases, critical analysis skills, excellent writing and communication skills. So when you're writing your resume, you need to make sure that there's a good match between what you're seeing and what is on the resume. So to illustrate that further, I think it's really helpful to sort of pull up the job description and the resume side by side and do a comparison. And so A should match up with A and B should match up with B. So if they're looking for communication skills in A, then on your resume, you should directly mention communication skills, whether it's, you've written reports or you've presented in front of colleagues, or you have public speaking ability in, such and such position. So that way, when the hiring manager is reading your resume, there is no question that, boy, you have all the skills or many of the skills that we're looking for in this job that we're hiring for. You're much more likely to hear back or get to that interview phase because there's really good alignment between the job description and your resume. We're not going to spend a ton of time with all of these, but I do want to particularly spend a good amount of time talking about the experience section, because that's kind of the bread and butter of a resume. There are a lot of ways that you can format a resume. And I've seen, hundreds of different resumes, and there's so many really great aspects around each of them. What's most important is that it's easy to follow and easy to read, because we know that recruiters don't spend a ton of time reading these documents, and so we want it to be nice and easy for them. So here are a couple principles that I want you to make mention of. First of all, short and sweet. It should be a one-page document, no more, no less. So if you're having trouble coming up with things to put on the resume, maybe we need to brainstorm some creative ways to fill out the page a little bit more to add content. If you're onto that second page, I would recommend that we do some reducing to get it to one page. A couple things that relate to that. There's a difference between a resume and a CV. A CV stands for curriculum vitae, and these are more academic documents. So if you're going to grad school, if you're looking for jobs within academia, you would probably end up using a CV format, and there's not really a page limit to that. So that's kind of the one major exception to having a longer than one page document. But for most students, one page is the best way. We want you for these documents to be scannable and readable, meaning that when you look at that example to the left, it's real easy to follow. The sections are clear, bullet points are easy to read, all of that. And part of the reason why is because we know that it's no longer just human eyes that are looking at these. Computers are now reading resumes. A lot of companies are using software, AI, to be sort of the initial readers of resumes, and they're looking for keywords, in particular, qualifications. So if they're looking for someone who's going to be a junior or senior for a internship, it's going to look at what your expected graduation year is, so that way it knows whether you are of appropriate age that they're looking for. Or if they're looking for someone with skills in Photoshop because they're hiring a graphic designer, it's going to be looking for the word Photoshop or graphic design. So things like that. And so we want to make sure that this document is formatted in such a way that it's nice and easy to read. Next, we want you to avoid common templates, particularly from Microsoft Word, Google Docs, and Apple Pages. Those word processors come with all kinds of pre-made, ready-to-go resume templates. And for a lot of people, that's a great place to start, especially if you're just coming out of high school. But as you are beginning to get closer to graduation, you're going to be sending resumes to larger companies. We want you to avoid those common templates because everybody uses them. I see those templates every single day in my job. And so what actually makes you feel like you're standing out is doing the exact opposite. You're not standing out at all because everybody else is using those resumes. So the next point, we encourage you to consult the CSLD examples. We post all kinds of great resume examples on our website in handout form, and we encourage you to copy them in terms of how they're formatted, and let them be a guide for you. You can download those as PDFs or Microsoft documents. And so consult those. Those are going to be helpful in terms of your own formatting. And we're going to be posting more of those over the next semester. We're curating some really good examples from current students, former students, and all of that. In terms of font, shoot for 10 to 12 point font in terms of size, and try to keep it pretty simple. I mean, the classics would be Arial and Times New Roman, but there's a lot of really great fonts out there. Just choose one that's easy to read, and it's still pretty simple looking. And then finally, for your margins, you can go as low as 1/2 inch margins. Anywhere between 1/2 an inch and an inch is acceptable. So if you're one of those people that just has a little bit of content on that second page, you're looking for ways to reduce a little bit, play around with those margins, and you might be able to get it to one page. All right. So moving on to content, we're going to cover this first section: contact info, profile, and education. So for your contact info, make sure you include your location, and just city and state is fine. You can see on this example here, there is a street address, and we call that optional. So if you want to include that information on your resume, by all means, feel free to do that. But we also know that there's a lot of privacy concerns when we post resumes on online spaces like LinkedIn, Indeed, Handshake. And so if you're concerned about that privacy aspect, just including the city and state is plenty. But do make sure that you include your phone number, preferably a cell phone number, and a working email address. Some optionals are your LinkedIn profile URL, if you want to drive them there, a personal website or a GitHub, basically any place that you might be curating examples of the work that you've done, and you want to push an employer to see that kind of stuff, like a portfolio or anything like that. You can include that up in your contact information. In terms of a profile, there's this thing that can go up at the top of your resume. We're using profile language. We refer to it as like a summary. Sometimes people use objectives. These are all things that would go at the top of the resume that just says a little bit about who you are and what your goal is. So a good example is one that we have on here. So detail-oriented and dependable geography student with significant research experience, team player with effective communication skills and positive attitude, committed to bringing an innovative approach to achieving the company's mission. So the reason why this would be good is because it highlights a couple soft skills, things about you. So like detail-oriented, dependable, team player, communication skills. All of those are great soft skills. That just says a little bit about what you bring to the table. There's a highlight of your experience. So it talks about research experience. Maybe you want to highlight your current, working position. And then finally, it is employer focused. So at the bottom, you can see that there's a, mention of, helping to achieve the company's mission. You can even get more specific if you're really targeting this resume to a particular company. And so you can, maybe use some of the company's mission language in there. But either way, you're really pitching yourself. It's like a brief elevator pitch at the top of your resume. Pitch a couple things that you want them to know about you right at the top, and it's still employer focused. In terms of education, keep it simple. You can see from the example there, that's basically what you're looking for. The GPA, we say you can include it if it's above a 3.0. Anything below that, we do want you to be a little bit careful of. Sometimes 3.0 is the clear marker that they have, I guess. If they do care about GPA, oftentimes it's the 3.0 cutoff. And then instead of including a date range like you would for your experience, include just your expected graduation date. All right. This is a section I want to spend the most intentional time with because it's kind of the most important piece in terms of highlighting your experiences. So when you're writing about your experience, again, you can see from the example here, we want them to be presented with bullet points here. But what you're going to include are the job details like the position title, company name, location, and dates. In terms of the content of your experience, each of these bullet points should start with an action verb, something that speaks to the action that you took in doing, whatever responsibility that you had. We want you to be as specific as possible and quantify when you can, meaning, as you can see from the examples, like in the first one, providing emergency assistance and crisis intervention to diverse homeless population. We could have just stopped with providing emergency assistance and crisis intervention, but now I have more information about who was that work being done for, diverse homeless population. Or you can see on the Broadway Twin Theater, the second bullet point, trained and supervised a staff of 10 employees. So that's an example of quantifying, adding numerical information that just provides additional detail. And then finally, it can be really helpful and important to highlight transferable skills. So transferable skills are any skills that you used or learned in one position that can still be used or helpful in future positions, especially if it's kind of unrelated. And I'll give an example of that in just a minute. But when you're quantifying your bullet points, I want to give you a quick example. So a simple example would be if this is somebody who's in social media marketing, and their bullet point currently says managed social media platforms. That's not bad, right? It still says what you've done. It starts with an action verb, managed, social media platform. So, what were you managing? But the better version, that's more quantifiable, would be this: managed social media strategy for company's name. So, San Francisco State University's Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook platforms, increasing engagement by approximately 300% within 5 months. So now we've gotten more detail, so I know which platforms this person is skilled in, and I've got quantifiable information about increasing the engagement by a certain level. So a really great practice is pull out your own resume and start going through your own bullet points and look for the ones that you feel like, I did not add much detail here. And see if you can brainstorm ways that you can add more specific information, like in this case, the particular platforms, or can I add more quantifiable information, like increasing engagement, or how many people were a part of this, or how many people did I train, or how many hours did I spend doing such and such, or how quickly did I accomplish X, Y, and Z. There's a lot of ways that you can include some of that more information. And ultimately what that's doing is it's helping the reader better imagine you doing that work, and speaks to the impact that that particular responsibility had either on the company's performance or the particular people that you were working with. So as you're kind of going through that process, try to update your own resume to include more of this kind of quantifiable information to your bullet points. But if you're having any issues with this, we would definitely encourage you to come in and see one of the career counselors here. We'd love to brainstorm ideas on how to make your bullet points a little bit more engaging and quantifiable. So moving on to talk a little bit about transferable skills again. So let's say you have a job, maybe a summer job that isn't really related to your particular field. The example that I have on here is from my own life. I was a lifeguard in college, and it was a great job to pay the bills and to save up for my next academic year, and I was good at it. And so I did this for a couple of years, but it had nothing to do with what I wanted to be doing in the future, which is work within education. So instead of leaving off lifeguard from my resume, I did include it, but I talked about my lifeguarding in a way that highlights some of these transferable skills. Because things like critical thinking, customer service, leadership, attention to detail, and communication, these things are transferable, right? They're helpful regardless of the context that I'm in. So maybe I included a bullet point that talked about the fact that I was a shift manager, and I, created scheduling and, made sure that the other lifeguards in my shift knew what rotation they were going to be on and things like that. So that speaks to my leadership ability over some of these other folks. Or I could talk about attention to detail in how, I needed to, scan the pool, or I needed to make sure that all the chemicals were, perfectly safe and, at proper levels. All of those things speak to attention to detail. So you can give examples from your work that highlight these really great transferable skills. All right, so finally under experience, we think about activities and leadership. So these would be things that aren't maybe full-blown like work experiences or internships, but things that you were involved in extracurricularly that would still be beneficial. So think about volunteer experiences, any groups or clubs that you were part of, Athletics are a great example. Any sort of leadership position that you may have in like the dorms or in a community organization that you're a part of, or church. A lot of really great ideas. To the left, there are two ways that you can sort of arrange these on your resume. The top example would be more simple, meaning you're giving maybe the name of the organization, your title, and then the dates that you were involved in that. The example below is kind of arranged a little bit like the experience section, your work experience, where you're actually giving a little bit more detail, some bullet points that describe that experience. So either if that experience was really robust, or maybe is related to the field that you want to be in, or maybe you're someone who just needs to fill up more space on the resume to get it to that one page marker, then you can consider adding a little bit more detail. All right, finally, the skills section. With a skills section on a resume, we really want you to focus on hard skills. So these would be easily quantifiable skills, like the rest of the things that I mentioned. So these would be technologies, languages, lab skills, certifications, things like that. And the reason why we want to focus on hard skills is because a lot of times with certain jobs, companies want you to have maybe a certain skill, like I had mentioned before, Photoshop, or maybe it's a particular coding language, or for geography, a lot of you using like GIS software. Things like that allow the employer to know right away, hey, I've got this skill. For any of you who have soft skills mentioned on your skills section, so those would be things like leadership and communication, public speaking, attention to detail, all of those sorts of things, we want you to highlight those in your bullet points for your experiences, or in the profile like I mentioned up above. So your skills section should really focus in on some of these harder skills that we give examples here. Some things not to include on your resume. Don't include your references, or even the phrase references available upon request. We want you to actually submit those separately. So either they're going to ask for references within like an online application, or you can submit them in a completely separate document at a later time. No need to include your own street address. I mentioned that before for privacy concerns. City and state is plenty. Do not include a headshot. And we do know, and I do want to make mention that some other countries do require or prefer headshots. So this is something that you might want to Google if you're going to be applying for jobs in other countries around the world. But in the US, we do not include headshots. No need to include the company address in the experience section. Again, just city and state is perfect. GPA below 3.0, don't include it. And we're not including any personal pronouns, which is basically like complete sentences. When you say, I managed social media platforms, you're simply just going to start with your action verb, manage social media platforms. So my final resume tips would be to submit this document as a PDF. The reason why is if some of you have experienced having a Word document that's open on one computer, and then you open it on a different computer and the formatting gets a little off. Submitting it as a PDF basically locks it in, almost like an image. It's not going to be changeable or editable. So that way, no matter who opens it up on what computer, your resume is going to stay perfectly formatted. Don't use those common templates, like I mentioned. You don't want it to look like everybody else. Make sure that you update your resume often, especially so that you don't forget any of those past experiences that you've had. We recommend updating every 3 to 6 months. And this document must be perfect, no errors whatsoever. A lot of times recruiters are trying to come up with reasons why they might want to throw somebody's resume in the bin because they have a lot of resumes to get through. And if they find errors or mistakes, that might be an easy reason to throw your resume out. So don't give them that reason. Make sure it's perfectly proofread. Bring it in to see us. We'd be happy to review it, make sure that there's no mistakes. And then finally, point 4, include the most important information in the top third of the page. This makes sure that when a recruiter is looking at it and they start to scan, they're seeing the things that they care most about right away. That's going to increase their chance of reading the rest of the document. So make sure that the most relevant information is as close to the top of the page as you can get it. So what's a cover letter? How do we write a good one? Think about the resume and the cover letter as documents that are working together in conjunction. and that the cover letter is more of an elaboration on the experiences that show up in the resume. So in terms of the contents, I want to give you this formula that hopefully is really memorable. You won't be able to forget it, but you're writing 3 main paragraphs. Paragraph 1 is I love you. Paragraph 2 is you love me. Paragraph 3 is let's connect. So let's dive into what goes into those. So first paragraph, I love you. You're going to name the position and where you learned about it. And this is mostly a gift to the recruiter. They post jobs on a lot of different sites. It might post on Indeed, Handshake, and LinkedIn. And if you're saying that you learned about it on Handshake and applied through Handshake, that's great data for them. So that's just a helpful thing. But here's the I love you portion. State why you want that particular job at that particular company. You're telling them what is it that you really like and admire about that particular company. Maybe you went on their website and you really admire their mission statement or their values. Or maybe it's a particular product that they make that you've used in the past and you want to help get that product into other people's hands. Maybe you just really believe in, their philosophy of X. Whatever it is, you're thinking through what is it that's really motivating me to apply for this position at this company, and you're reflecting that back to them. You're stating that reason. And this is literally the most important thing that can go into a cover letter, because what it's doing is it's creating some alignment between who you are and who they are. So if you think about hiring as companies looking for candidates who are both qualified and who are a good cultural fit for their organization, the resume really does a great job at getting that qualifications piece, but it doesn't necessarily hit at that cultural fit aspect. This is where that's really helpful. So as you're aligning yourself with what they are about as a company, you're creating that alignment. You're essentially saying, I'm a good fit. I'm a good culture fit for this company. So really, really important. And you'll notice this needs to be different for every cover letter that you write. So you're not just going to write one generic cover letter that you just pump out to every single company. That first paragraph is going to be tailored and unique every single time. And it's going to be based on the research that you're doing into that company. So the second paragraph, you love me, this is where you're telling them all about your experiences and qualifications that should make them really like you as a candidate. And so this is where you're sort of elaborating on some of those experiences that you're mentioning in your resume, but you're giving a little bit more detail. You're giving some more examples. So it wouldn't be enough just to say, I'm a really strong communicator. We want you to elaborate and say, in my position as a, tour guide for San Francisco State University, I had the opportunity to present in front of large groups of prospective students and parents, presenting great information about the university and answering questions. Great. That actually gives some clear evidence to your communication ability instead of just claiming that you're a strong communicator. Finally, let's connect. This is probably the part that's going to stay the same for most of your cover letters, but you're simply real quick re-summarizing your qualifications. You're referring to an enclosed resume, and you're expressing your appreciation for their time and consideration. So that's it. I love you. You love me. Let's connect. Hopefully that's burned in your memory now, and you'll be able to remember, how do I write a great cover letter? Real quick on formatting. It can be helpful to duplicate your resume header. So on the example to the left, that might be the exact same as what you might have at the very top of your resume in terms of your name and some of your contact info. We definitely want you to keep your font consistent to the resume. So whatever font you picked for the resume, just pick the same one here. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same size font, but if it is the same size, that's great too. Cover letters are business letter format, and there's a couple different ways that you can do that. Honestly, if you just Googled business letter format, you're going to see whatever examples that you're finding, those would all be appropriate. We want to keep these documents pretty short, so no more than a page, especially if you're more in like the tech field. you definitely want to keep it to like half a page or less. Keep it simple. As again, you can see on the example to the left, don't indent the start of a new paragraph. Just give a little bit of white space in between your main paragraphs. And then finally, again, you're going to customize the letter for each new job that you apply for. And the most customization that's going to occur is in that first paragraph where you're telling them what do you like about that company and why you're applying for that job. I want to give you a quick example of a great why statement. So this is a person who's applying to be a research intern at Goodwin Simon Strategic Research. And in blue there, you can see that statement. And I'll read it to you in case you're having a hard time seeing it. But they say GSSR's unique approach to using the latest social science and neuroaffective research to understand how emotional reactions influence people's decision-making is very innovative and aligns with my interest in the combination of psychology and public opinion research. That's a great why statement. They are, you can clearly see that this person has spent some time on GSSR's website. They've looked into the type of work that they do. Maybe they even like read some of their mission statement. That language that they're using is probably pulled right from that website. So they're saying, what do they like about it? They like their approach to doing social science and how it intersects with decision making. They praise it, and they then talk about how that aligns with your own interest areas. So there's a lot of different ways that you can include some of this good information. And I do want to say, this is the point where you might name drop. So if you happen to know somebody who works at that company, or know someone who used to work at that company, or anything like that, feel free to name drop. You know, I recently sat down with so-and-so who really talked about, you know, how great this company is for employees and teamwork. And I would love the opportunity to contribute to that really great team environment. Something like that would, you know, absolutely name drop. A recruiter is gonna notice that, and they may even then go talk to that person, which then could really create a great referral type situation. So my final tips for cover letters would be to always personalize, address the letter to a particular person, which means do some research. Figure out who the hiring manager is, or figure out who might be the head of the particular department that you're applying to. Go to the company's website, look at the staff page, look at the About Us page, see if you can find a person to address this letter to. Use keywords and phrases from the job description. So just like I had that slide with resumes where you're sort of pulling up the job description alongside the resume, do the same thing with the cover letter. If they're talking a lot about collaboration and you're in your cover letter or resume talking a lot about teamwork, well, we know that kind of talks about the same thing. So maybe update your language to use collaboration language instead of teamwork, because that better aligns with the language that they're using. It's really important, research the company, because it's going to help you write that why statement, and it's ultimately going to help you decide, like, do I actually want to work here? If in your researching you realize the stuff that they do or what they're about is not really what I'm interested in, you know, you don't have to apply for that job. So it's good in that discernment process.
For more information, visit us at csld.sfsu.edu.